Welcome to the Den of Dissent. This is a show where we challenge the current culture and mainstream talking points of the day. What is the news telling us? What is the culture telling us? Where is our civilization headed? And by what standard do we judge these issues? Do you agree or do you dissent? Let's find out. What's going on, world? I'm back. Check it out. Before we jump into the show, let me just promote a source, something that I actually subscribe to and that I like. Anytime I promote something, it's usually a quality source in terms of information. Anyway, this is a course actually developed by author Tom Woods, who wrote the book Meltdown, which talked about the financial crisis. And he also wrote a book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History. And Tom Woods was actually, he has a PhD. He went to Harvard, but he's also part of the Mises Institute, which promotes Austrian economics. And if you don't know what Austrian economics is, it's a school of thought that was developed by Ludwig von Mises, who was an economist and had great free market ideas and free market principles and taught really objective economics. But anyway, Tom Woods developed this history course called Liberty Classroom, and there are several instructors and professors in the classroom that have courses based on American history, constitutional history, Western civilization, logic, on and on it goes. And so Tom Woods developed this course because he saw that some of the institutions and colleges were just propagandizing their students and indoctrinating people, really, and not giving an objective perspective on history. And this is what Liberty Classroom does. So you'll find courses in here. Well, let me just read this. He says, the problem in the universities, though, goes well beyond history. The university system nowadays is truly a disaster area all around. And he also says that there's no place on earth where you are less likely to learn true history or indeed many other subjects than at an American university. So basically he's saying that these universities, our educational system is dumbing us down. And so that's why he developed Liberty Classroom. And Tom Woods is very educated. But if you want real knowledge, real education, an objective perspective, and look at history and how the world really works, check out Liberty Classroom. And also, if you want to learn how to argue your points, learn about logic and how to defend your position, you know, when you get into conversations with people and all they're doing is just regurgitating the same mainstream talking points that are usually false. If you want to learn how to argue your points effectively and be kicked out of your Thanksgiving dinner because you're telling the truth, check out Liberty Classroom. This will have you on your way. What else? Let me just show you some of the courses offered in this course. The American Revolution, a Constitutional Conflict, Austrian Economics Step by Step, Introduction to Logic, The History of Conservatism and Libertarianism, U.S. Constitutional History, U.S. History since 1877, Western Civilization to 1500, Western Civilization since 1500, and many more. There's a course on communism, socialism, a lot of good stuff in here. And there's also a Q&A area where you can talk to the professors if you have questions about, some of the courses and some of the information. So get informed. Don't be a dummy. Don't be propagandized. Get some truth. Liberty Classroom. Now, moving on. Today, I have David Patrick Harry. He has a channel called the David Patrick Harry YouTube channel. And then he also has another channel called Church of the Eternal Logos. So David Patrick Harry is a religious studies scholar, and he examines things from a Eastern Orthodox Christian perspective. And he talks about world religions, mysticism, geopolitics, culture, and much more. And he does it from a Christian perspective, which is what I like. So today we talked about masculinity. What is a man? What is masculinity? What does biblical Christ-like masculinity look like? And the reason why I spoke to him about this is because we talked about first off, we talked about the manosphere. If you don't know what the manosphere is, it's like a subject area where there are these influencers like Kevin Samuels and Fresh and Fit that give advice to men about fitness, about finance, about relationships, but they're doing it from a worldly perspective. And, I didn't agree with all of the advice that they were given, especially when it comes to relationships. They were telling, they think it's okay for guys to be promiscuous, sleep around, and, just do whatever you want to do in that sense. And there's some good things that they promote, like fitness, taking care of your body. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with making some money, but don't make that the object of your life. And so they do these things. This is worldly advice that they're giving. There's really nothing too Christ-like about some of the advice that they give. And I'm not saying nobody's a saint really, but we should examine these things from a godly perspective and give anybody really just godly advice, biblical advice on how to live. So David Patrick Harry is one of the few voices that I've seen criticize the manosphere or combat their talking points from a Christian perspective, because I rarely saw anybody, or I don't think I've seen anybody besides him. Well, there's some other guys that do it too, but he was one of the first voices that I heard really giving some sound advice about how to be a man and what masculinity really is about, what Christ-like biblical masculinity is about. And so I wanted to have this conversation because a lot of times you hear, especially from women, and women aren't innocent either. Some women have their flaws, but we've often heard stories of men leaving their wives or having multiple children with multiple women, not being good fathers, men being promiscuous, having children out of wedlock, on and on and on. And, the whole narrative about with women calling men dogs and calling men cheaters. And I've heard women tell me some horrible stories about men and how they've been treated. It's a common thing. Now there's good men out there, obviously. There's good women out there. There's bad women out there. So, but this has always been like a common perception and a common talking point amongst women. Men are cheaters, dogs, this, that. They'll drop something good in a heartbeat just to go have a moment of pleasure with another woman and whatever. And so I think maybe we as men need to change that talking point, recapture our power and recapture what God has given to us, recapture the principles that God wants us to have and God wants us to implement in our lives. So that's why I had David Patrick Harry on today. So I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. If you want to support the show, I'll post some links in the description. Check out David Patrick Harry's channel as well. It's a lot of words I'm getting out of my mouth. But yeah, check out those sources. Let me know what you think. Post some comments. And on that note, let's get started. Welcome to the Den of Dissent. Today we have David Patrick Harry. He is a religious studies scholar, also host of Church of the Eternal Logos, which is an educational channel devoted to Orthodox Christian apologetics. He's done academic work as well as addressing topics like comparative mysticism, Gnosticism, world religions, esoteric traditions, the spirituality of technology, much more. And he also touches on geopolitics as well. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate that. And that was a great intro. That hits a lot of the topics I discuss. Yeah, a lot of people ask what exactly, because the Church of the Eternal Logos is a bit of a misnomer. I do not run a church. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a religious leader. It's sort of just a play on words. I'm an Orthodox Christian and kind of just take the core of Orthodox theology, which we would call like Logos theology, and just analyze all the topics that you just discussed from that perspective. So thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I actually heard about you on a Jay Dyer podcast, and you guys were
Oh, yeah.
talking. Yeah, you guys were talking about the Manosphere. So that's when I started checking you out and looking at your content. I was like, man, this guy's on point. Because it's very rare that we get some really solid voices and solid reasoning behind what's going on in the world in different areas. But I wanted to
Yeah.
get into the Manosphere. How would you define the Manosphere?
Hmm. I would say to generally characterize what the manosphere is really just a sort of recognition of, to use red pill terminology, um, this feminized society, this gynocentric world order, and men are trying to then rediscover how to be a masculine man in the 21st century. I have my own criticisms of some of the prescriptions that are offered, because where the manosphere ends and the red pill begins, I think that's pretty ambiguous. It kind of blends into each other. But the manosphere, I think, is really about these sort of general conversations in society about men's rights, the state of masculinity, marriage, alimony, child support, divorce rates, general feminization of society. And I would, as an Orthodox Christian, probably agree with much of the descriptive dimensions of like the red pill or some of the manosphere stuff. But when it comes to prescription, that's where I would personally diverge quite a bit from some of their worldviews and opinions.
Yeah. Um, I started finding out about this whole Manosphere area like years ago, and for me, it started. People kept talking about Kevin Samuels,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I started
God rest his
watching.
soul.
Yeah, and he had a lot of decent advice, but there were some things that I didn't agree with. And but he had a video called "How Things Your Father Didn't Teach You," and it was like a whole video on how to clean your room and clean your refrigerator. And honestly, after watching it, I went to Target and bought like a bunch of cleaning supplies, and I cleaned my refrigerator that day. I mean, it was it wasn't too dirty, but I just felt motivated to go, do something productive after watching him.
Hmm.
But then I started watching his videos critiquing women and relationships, and he was talking about promiscuity, and it sounded like he has no problem with men being promiscuous as long as you have a lot of money, and
Right.
same thing with women. But this is the reoccurring message I'm seeing throughout this manosphere, and with Fresh and
Hmm.
Fit, things like this. What do you think the manosphere gets wrong in terms of what they're teaching men?
Well, so just like you're talking with Kevin Samuels, his content went from more manosphere oriented stuff in regards to advocacy for masculinity, helping young men figure out aspects of being an adult. And then towards the end, especially when he went viral during 2020 during the lockdown, it's just him having women on grading themselves, showing their delusion, criticizing their body count, stuff like that. All of stuff that I think is legitimate and probably more blending into, I guess, the red pill sphere. But as an Orthodox Christian, I'm coming at it from a very traditional understanding of gender roles, marriage roles, the expectation of family building. And so that's not really a point that's advocated for, generally speaking, in the manosphere or red pill sphere, highlighting, which I would totally agree with, the detrimental aspects of the marriage courts and divorce courts and everything that's going on, and how women, in a way, are being incentivized and paid to break up their families. Where I would totally disagree is what exactly the role of a masculine man is. And it's kind of been popular because women, when they come on these shows, they'll ask them like, what are they looking for? And it's like the 6'6", 6 foot, six pack, six figures a year. And all those things are good signifiers of like physical strength and health, good genetics, and financial success. But to relegate men to these material standards totally disempowers them, really, because coming at it from a Christian perspective, we are made in the image of God. Uh, Eve was made as a helper for Adam. And when we look at even the fall of creation, Eve eats the apple first. Women have a more proclivity, if you will, towards worldly things. She listens to the serpent, eats the apple, but we don't fall. We only fall when Adam turns from God and listens to the woman and does something that he's not supposed to do. And so when I look at the manosphere or the red pill sphere, generally speaking, in many ways, it's almost just the inversion of feminism. It's male feminism.
Mm.
So you just become successful at all costs. So the Tate brothers, for example, doing webcam services. Tristan Tate, who I don't know the heart of those gentlemen, but he claims he's an Orthodox Christian. But even within the last 2 years, has bragged about how many women he's got into sexual work. Bragging about how many virgins he slept with no intention of marrying them. And so this is just men pursuing money for the state, for the sole material purpose of having money. How we make our money, again, coming from a Christian perspective, is really important. So if you become a millionaire and you view yourself as high status and you did it off webcam services while making fun of all these men that are paying these girls for these fake relationships through webcams, that seems pretty dishonest to me. That doesn't seem like a man who's actually moving towards a higher telos, a higher purpose, a higher direction. So, just getting fit and getting jacked and then becoming obsessed with your own image, that doesn't seem very masculine. That seems pretty feminine to me. So much of the manosphere, I would argue, is the way that they articulate what masculinity is or what it means to be a man, just have high social status, have money, and be physically fit. All those things are good and well, but we have a purpose as men. And so one of the things that isn't addressed is things like honor,
Mm-hmm.
right? What about your family name? What about your ancestors? How many kids are you going to have? Well, are you going to be a man that a woman will submit to? Because that's obviously a problem, is once you start getting into the dating market, how exactly you're going to go about selecting for a wife. And if you don't have traditional religious values, like how can these manosphere guys talk about how it's good and right that a woman's a virgin, but they're allowed to sleep with as many women as they want and utilize a virgin girl just for sexual pleasure? That again is immoral.
Right.
And it's all about hedonism. It's all about satisfaction of one's own pleasure. And that's feminine. A man, when we look at great men in history, I can't think of any man that is celebrated by other men because he pursued pleasure.
Mm.
It's almost the exact opposite. It's because he pursued a higher purpose. He died for his people. He died for his tribe. He died for his group. He did something that's self-sacrificial, which then as a Christian, I'd say is reminiscent of the archetype of the crucifixion, which I believe is a literal reality. But to use that Jungian language, the archetype of a man rising to the occasion of self-sacrifice for things that maybe it's not even his fault for. That's what masculinity is. How can you be a head of a house and not take all the responsibility for what happens within it? I mean,
Right.
But that's what they're not orienting men towards. It's about like just playing the game of feminist women. They complain about feminist women, and then their whole strategy is how then do you date and sleep with feminist women? It's like, well, I'm not interested in that game. I'm interested in becoming a man, and then that woman will naturally follow. And that's how we reorient society.
Absolutely. Wow. Oh man. Man, you dropped some gems right there. So, sometimes I get into these conversations with family, friends, and so forth, and I've been hearing the same message from men for years, but I'll separate Christian men from that because Christian men have a different worldview on relationships. But the typical message you hear in the world from a lot of men is that, well, they really do insult women and dog women out and talk about women like they say, I've heard, women, they initiate 70% of divorces. I've heard that from different people, but then they'll say something like, well, marriage is a bad contract and women just want money. And if a woman sleeps around she gets labeled as, you already know what the term is, but
Hmm.
those same men will say, well, it's all right for me to go sleep around. But meanwhile, they'll
Exactly.
criticize the women. And so it's like, on one hand, they're okay with sleeping around and promiscuity, but when the women engages in it, they're labeled as whores pretty much.
Right.
But yet they want to be with good women or women with good values. But at the same time, they're encouraging the whorish behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody like Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit has a prescription for young men, which is to not get married until you're 35, make over $100,000, and sleep with 50 women. Meanwhile, the entire premise of Fresh and Fit is bringing on promiscuous women and then shaming them for their behaviors and highlighting that no man is going to want to be with you long term or marry you. And I can get some of the criticism aimed towards women because obviously the women of today are not like our grandmothers, but it seems totally contradictory that you then are going to be a whore producer when then criticizing the fact that those women exist and they're participating in that behavior. And it's even come out that Myron Gaines had like a sugar daddy account. He's talked openly about being on all the dating apps, and then he's constantly describing how he's only going to marry a virgin, probably a Muslim girl. And it's like, well, what's the point? And if you already have the money and you're already over 35, how come he's not getting married right today and going to whatever Muslim nation he wants to go to find a virgin girl? That seems like the masculine move.
Right.
And so commitment, long-term commitment, isn't just a trick by the church or a trick by religious institutions. It's what allows a man to focus on things that are more important than immediate satisfaction. Having a wife that supports your mission and building a family and she watching out for the children and having children while you focus on providing, protecting, and leading, that's beneficial for not just you and her and the kids, but all of society. And so we see the degradation of the nuclear family, which many in the manosphere and red pill, they'll highlight, oh yeah, men have an injustice in the court system. They can't find good women to marry. And yet very few of them are actually married. I know Rollo Tomasi, I've spoke with him and he is married. And certainly we have very different prescriptions. He says that the red pill is descriptive. And okay, I can agree with much of the red pill on the descriptive part, but men producing the women that they criticize and then in reality just becoming a male version of them.
Right.
Because we've all, again, I had a checkered past before I became Orthodox. So we all fall away. We all do things we're not supposed to do. But the point is, how are you going to help men get out of the situation that they're in today? Well, telling them and assuming, as Myron and Pearly Things has also articulated, that, well, the feminism isn't going to change. The women are just going to get worse. So then men have to adapt to it. I'm not interested in adapting because I'm not a victim of circumstance. So as a Christian man, somebody who's trying to follow God and a higher purpose, no, I'm not going to conform to feminist delusions and wishes and alter the way in which I'm going to go about finding my mating strategy. I'm going to do what works. I'm going to do what God has ordained, and I'm going to do something that pushes me towards a transcendent purpose.
Right.
And that includes staying physically fit, having financial money to take care of the family and things like that. But for those are not the ends, right? What is the greatest thing a man can do? And throughout history, every man knew it was about his children.
Mm.
And historically, this is another facet that is mentioned. Historically, a lot of men died of battle. So historically, a lot of men got married early, impregnated their wives, had children, and then they went to battle to defend the boundaries of their cultures, their nations, their peoples, and they probably died. And now we look in 2024, and there's this huge disparity where 70% of the men are viewed unattractive by 80% of the women, according to statistics and dating apps. Well, the average, woman, let's say, to use, rude language, let's say she's a 4 out of 10. Historically, she would be married to a man who's a 4 out of 10. But because of the attention they garner through social media, they have an elevated expectation, which is true. So then they're thinking they're going to get a 7 or an 8 out of 10. And the people who typically would get together in history are not getting together. And so there's not enough to go around for everybody.
Mm.
And so I think that's going to be a difficult pill to swallow, even with my own prescriptions. Is First of all, I don't think there's going to be a mass changing of men's mentalities and behaviors, but for those that do wish to change, I think there is plenty of women that would follow, because that's what we want in building a traditional family. But every man out there probably won't be able to get married with a traditional woman, because there's just not enough to go around for everybody.
And why do you think that is? Is it because the culture is producing unqualified women, or just produce or promoting bad values?
Yeah, I think that women are so inundated with the feminist ideology and just secular cultural in general, um, that what is their purpose for even wanting to get married? And some girls, it's having their sort of princess day and spending all this money on the wedding. It's about the photo shoot. It's about the celebration, and or it's about happiness, right? You mentioned this divorce statistics that across all demographics, women initiate 70+% of all divorces. And then you look at the reasoning why, and it's like uh, lack of attraction, financial problems, or they're unhappy. Well, all three of those things from a Christian perspective aren't worthy for divorce, because the marriage itself is a sacrament. And from the onset, that we are making a commitment before God. This is a sacrament. We're becoming one flesh, and there is no such thing as divorce moving forward. And so people have this remnant of a Christian traditional society, monogamous marriage and family building, and yet the people engaging in the activity aren't traditional people. And
Mm,
so it's doomed to failure from the onset. And so that's where it's like the red pill is criticizing marriage, rightfully so. But if you're a traditional Christian, it's our obligation as an Orthodox Christian. There's only two forms of if you want to say, sort of self-sacrificial martyrdom outside of actually being killed for the faith. And one is monasticism, where you're marrying Christ. The other one is marriage. The church does not have an idea that it's okay for you to be 50 years old as a man and never be married and have all these different women, or maybe even have multiple children. That's not the church doesn't that's not a view of the church that a man should be doing. The point is for you to find your purpose. The point then is to find a woman who supports your purpose, who's going to then stand with you and take care of the family while you continue to pursue that purpose and provide and lead and protect them.
yeah. Where do you think the feminization of men came from? How did it start, would
Mm.
you say? Or where did it arise from?
Well, there's a lot of factors. I would argue that the most significant one is the manipulation of our sexual energy. So when we look at pornography, and this is why I've talked sort of symbolically about the Jezebel spirit, and that's what we're living in right now. So Jezebel in Bible, she was married to King Ahab, and he was a weak man, and he was ruled by his wife, and she got the entire tribe of Israel to worship a false god, Baal. They went back to child sacrifice. Well, she was a beautiful seductress. Well, you look at Western society today, and that's the spirit that rules, is men are weak. They're not willing to say a no to a woman. They're not willing to forego the opportunity of sex. And so they'll accommodate all things. And in turn, they are Adam following a woman. They are King Ahab following Jezebel. And so um, I would argue that, and this is where you can look into pornography being a sort of social weapon used by various nations. It's not a secret that Israel used it in Ramada when they took over the TV towers and broadcasted hardcore pornography to all the Palestinians, because the more you masturbate, the more you especially engage pornography, one, rewires your brain in regards to its relationship to sex and pleasure, but it's going to feminize men. And the more that you aren't in control of your own sexual urges, which all men struggle with, and that's why traditionally you have a wife, and then there's a context for those desires to be fulfilled in a wholesome, righteous way. But men then aren't getting married, and they have a symbolic leash around their neck that is all sexual. And so you look at the music, you look at the videos, you look at social media, the only men are totally ran by the sexual attention that they give and direct towards women. And that is a
Mhm.
total inversion. And I think that is a massive weakness that makes us more feminine, because we're now being led by an emotional stimulation, a physical sexual stimulation. We're not supposed to be emotional creatures. We're supposed to be more rational creatures. And the
Right.
emotional side of women is beautiful in the context of children and family. Yeah, they have an intuition that maybe we aren't privy to in some regards, but the men are becoming less rational. They have less purpose. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the Western world outside of fentanyl use. So people, if they're not overdosing from drug use, they're literally just offing themselves.
Right.
And this is a mixture of a lack of meaning, which is feminist. Uh, it's a lack of ability to control oneself, and it's overall a problem of deterioration and feminization of men, in my opinion.
Yeah. Man. So you just said something that made me think. So throughout the years when I've been in conversation with men, this idea of a man sleeping with multiple women, especially like in high school days and things like that, it's
Mm-hmm.
been promoted as something masculine. You're a conqueror, and you know you get praised for this. Men, praise each other for this kind of behavior. But from what you're saying, men are actually giving in to their emotions, which shows a form of weakness, which is kind of more of a feminine thing to do.
Right.
So I never really thought of, actually, I have thought about that years ago, but I never really articulated it because, you would hear men say things like, oh, well, I was with this person, and they look down on men who aren't sleeping around, or men who
Right.
do preserve themselves. But what you're saying is like, it's actually inverted feminism. It's femininity, but it's just being inverted.
Right.
So,
And that's how my high school culture was, and I fell victim to that. And I think it's considered masculine because of the access to sex, right? Because when you're in high school, not every guy there has the ability to get a girl that's willing to have sex with them. But it is leading to this precedent where somehow the more women you sleep with, the more masculine you are. And I think if you just look at great men of history, that has never, ever been the case. The men who are just chasing women are going to be forgotten in history. And so, what is the point of being a great man? It's your progeny and it's your purpose and like what your stamp on the world. That's it. That's the only thing that we leave here. And so if your only thing is smashing as much as you can, I mean, you're a nobody. I don't care how much money you have or how popular you are. You're not contributing to anything that's going to transcend your own lifespan.
mhm.
And the things that will transcend your lifespan is your purpose and what you build, which includes your children and your wife and your family.
All right. You dropped a major nugget not too long ago. You said that Israel was promoting pornography to Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
I've,
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah,
never.
that happened. Not currently with the situation between Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel right now, but probably a decade to 20 years ago, when they had some conflicts, they took over the TV towers and deliberately broadcasted hardcore because pornography is illegal inside Israel.
Mm,
But and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole
yeah.
because it can get dicey, especially in terms of TOS. But anybody just wants to go look up who owns the majority of pornography sites and who
Mm,
owns the majority of the conglomerations of pornography sites. It's pretty much a monopoly, and I'll let people to come to their own conclusion when they look at who owns all that stuff.
yeah.
Maybe why would they do that? Because it makes men weak. If even in a pagan movie like the movie called the Northmen, it has to do with like Norse Vikings. It came out probably 3 or 4 years ago. Well, when the king returns, his wife, who you find out was actually sleeping with another man behind his back while he was off conquering at war, he comes back and he's injured, which he's not letting her know about, but she immediately wants to sleep with him. And he refuses to because he knows that there's going to be a coup that's going to happen. They're going to try to kill him, and he needs all the strength that he has. So throughout history, men knew that if you spill your seed, there is a weakening of your physical body to some degree.
mm,
And so when we look at then contemporary man and he can't control himself, if you can't control that, And the sexual energy is one of the strongest energies. So if you start getting into ritualistic magic and esoteric spirituality, the manipulation of sexual energy for the manifestation of desires or whatever it is that you're trying to conjure is huge. It's one of the most efficacious forms of magic. So I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look at the Western world and you look at the spread of promiscuity and pornography and the sexualization of everything, that men are a hell of a lot weaker because they're constantly spilling their own seed and they're led by the emotional stimulus of sex.
Wow. Wow. We talked earlier about the divorce rates, and you said women initiate, I think, 70% of the divorces. Why do you think that is? What's leading women to initiate these divorces, in your opinion?
Generally speaking, I would say it's because they're incentivized to do so. I mean, with the divorce courts, they're going to get half of the assets. They're going to get the children, so they'll be able to, live that uh, single mother, hot girl summer life, and they're going to be compensated just in so many ways in regards to child support, alimony, that type of stuff. So our society has structured itself where women believe that their purpose is to be happy. Because if you talk to the average woman, we've already laid out what a traditional masculine mindset is, and it's looking at the long term and it's already thinking about your death. I mean, I think that's a masculine move if you're going to move through the world to already be thinking about the end point and what, you're not going to be here that long. Most women, they're not thinking that long term. So um, they are so concerned about this sort of secular ethos of happiness and fulfillment and all these different things that they're not buying into marriage for the purposes of what the institution was built for in the first place, which is monogamous marriage, no divorce, having children, and getting through uh, the rest of your life together as partners. So women then enter these marriages, and you can see since no fault divorce in the 60s, it's skyrocketed in regards to the amount of divorces. So people are less religious, they're less traditional, they're more promiscuous, and when they're getting married, of course, they're having higher and higher divorce rates because the women, what is the thing that's keeping them in it? And
Yeah.
I would say for a lot of women, and I don't know their hearts, I don't know, their ultimate intentions, but I would argue for a lot of women, it's because of this idea that everything's going to be like a fairy tale.
Mhm.
And when you realize life isn't a fairy tale and marriage isn't this thing that solves all your problems, they're ready to get out of it. Social media is encouraging women to file for divorce. It's encouraging women that, just wait and have children later because that's going to drag you down. So then women in their fertile years, be it from 20 to 26, they're having hot girl summer. And this is where the red pill, I would say, is pretty accurate. Then they get into their later 20s, early 30s. Now they're ready to settle down. Well, they're not the same girl that they were. And then some women, when they do get married early, I saw some statistics highlighting that the average divorce of people that were getting married in their earlier 20s was like 7 years. So then they're like 35, 36, and they're getting divorced. And then I would assume for the women, they're thinking, oh, well, I don't want to be with him. He's not my person. So I need to hurry and get out of it while I still have a little bit of fertility and a little bit of sexual capital to try to find the next man before I hit, um, you know, um, menopause. That's the
Right.
word I'm looking for.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough message to give a woman and a man, especially these days. Like, how do you tell a person, well, you're just coming into this to live a fairy tale and just to be happy? How do you tell that person, like, you may not be happy? I think earlier you were touching on some marriages, you might be in a relationship where you're not happy,
Yep.
but you got married for a purpose. And I'm thinking, a lot of these people who are secular, who don't even believe in God, they don't practice Christianity, but yet they're getting involved with a God ordained institution, a God created
Right.
concept, but they're not godly.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. It's doomed to fall apart. And that's where I think a lot of people, and especially the secular people, there's no explicit intention for the purpose of marriage. I think some men I've talked with, I have friends, maybe some much more religious than others, and some of the less religious of my friends, ended up that they were with the girl. They really loved him. They were infatuated. They dated for years. And then he feels like, well, the next obligation is to get her a ring and get engaged and then get married and be together. But, glory to God, I am engaged right now. But one of the things that I went about is being direct, incredibly direct about what the intentions of the whole thing is. And so I think for a lot of young people, they get married. And what is the intention? Did you ever explicitly articulate to the woman that you're getting ready to spend your life with that, what you're signing up for, what the goal that guys are going to try to accomplish together, like where you're going to go? Children. Like I talked with somebody, they got married and they hadn't even had a serious conversation about children and how many children they want. And I think she didn't want to have children yet. It's like, how are you getting married and you're not even talking about children? Your priorities are so screwed up. Like you deserve it. That's where I think secular marriage is doomed to fail. So I believe marriage is a sacrament from God, as you just articulated, but that doesn't mean I believe every single person in America or the Western world should get married.
Right.
Because if she's not also submitting to God, what reason does she have to submit to you? Well, the only reason then comes back into those three things that the Manosphere says. It's because you're more attractive than anybody she can be with. You have more money than anybody else she can be with, or you have more social status. So it's then the secular framework is that you have to attain those three things to have any leverage to keep the woman in the relationship because they have all the leverage. Well, if you're coming at it from a traditional perspective, it's good to have those things and be working on those. But the leverage is in the fact that she also believes in God and that we're trying to get to the kingdom together. And I'm going to occupy the role that I know that I'm supposed to occupy. And she's going to occupy the role that she's supposed to occupy. And that's explicit from the onset. And that comes into the problem. Then how do you become a man that can get a woman to submit to you? Because even in the Orthodox Church, we still have some of these problems. So the women have inflated expectations of what they think they deserve. They're like they're 33, 34, and they're still wanting to have that like utopian Ken and Barbie marriage. And, and I hope that they find it. My point is just using the sort of secular red pill is that, to use the crude terms of the sexual marketplace value, they don't have the same value, especially from an Orthodox perspective, where the whole point is to get married and have children. Mm-hmm. So men then, even in the Orthodox Church, women aren't finding the majority of men attractive. And so that's where we can agree on those three aspects of physical health, financial, and social status. You need those things. Those aren't ends in themselves. They're means to an end. But the point of the marriage is to construct long-term goals together and be together. And so that's the leverage. The leverage is if you're a man and you're with a traditional woman and they are understanding of the roles, and then you're fulfilling all those things. So you are staying fit. You are pursuing your career, wherever you may be. Maybe you're only making $40,000. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get married. That doesn't mean you can't find the right woman to be with you. That's where I would disagree with the red pill stuff. It's because the filters they're using to sort the women is incentivizing the same materialistic standards that they're criticizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want to find a woman that's going to ride or die, and it's not because of you. It's because of the transcendent understanding of God's role in the relationship, in the marriage, and the point of life in the first place.
Right. I was talking to a relative not too long ago, and she said we were talking about relationships, and I think she was talking about she was telling me about another relative that divorced his wife or something like that. But basically, he was cheating, and then somebody that was there, a friend, somebody was there, asked her, "Well, why did he cheat?" And my relative said, "Well, it's just a man's nature," and I've heard this throughout the years that, men are dogs. Women have often said this. Even men sometimes agree that men are dogs. Why? It seems like the standard for women in terms of how they conduct themselves sexually and otherwise is higher. And the standard for men is much lower. It's as if men are expected to be dogs and women are expected to conduct themselves with the higher standard. You know, even like I said, sexually, when a woman does something a man does, it's looked down upon much more strongly than when a man does it because it's expected. Do you think that men have allowed themselves to be regarded as dogs and have just given themselves away, like compromised themselves?
So I do think that I do not promote, generally premarital sex. Obviously, I engage in all that stuff before my faith, but I don't think it's healthy long term. Um, I do think, as the manosphere and the red pill try to describe, is that the relationship to sex is different between men and women. And like the releasing of oxytocin for a woman during the point of sexual intercourse is tied to her pair bonding abilities. Now, I think also, so they use the research for a woman, if she has more than 6 sexual partners, the chances of divorce begin to skyrocket, like 400 to 500% increase. But that's also true for men. And so I think in regards to describing men as dogs, we relate to sexuality very visually. And so whether you're a monogamous married man who's faithful and has never cheated, we can't help the fact that women are walking around half naked and that it causes you to take a second look. I mean, it's like innate in us. But the cheating part, I believe, is part of the weakness. So the fact that, and when we look at, to be fair here, when we look at these, people going around and asking people questions on the sidewalk, cheating is not relegated to a male activity at all anymore. Now, before, there's a lot more social stigma in regards to women cheating, and it was tied with family and childbearing and all this different stuff. Now with the birth control, which is a huge factor in regards to the skewing of sexual dynamics in our society, because it's sexual intercourse without responsibility, which is the general theme of Western culture, is the taking away of responsibility, which as men have to have. That's why men are so better at judging of other men, because if you are on a sports team or you're in a locker room or you're at the gym, we as men have already sorted ourselves out, and we do it very quickly. We know where each one kind of stands in a hierarchy, and the hierarchies change depending on what social setting we're in. But men need that, and then we hold each other accountable, and there's always the threat of violence in regards to maintaining your responsibilities. But with Western culture, there is no responsibility for anybody. Everybody points a finger at somebody else for why something exists. And so we live in a culture where sex is just a pastime pleasure. So women, these interviews, women are cheating at alarming rates, and they laugh about it and they think it's funny. Young girls find it funny, and I'm sure guys are doing it as well. I don't condone either one. I think cheating now, divorced from its historical circumstances, is way more equal amongst men and women. But it gets back to being led by your sexual passions, right? So if you have a beautiful wife, children, a family that is good and thriving, and you're still sleeping around, that's a weakness. That's where I would disagree with somebody like a Justin Waller when he was on the Whatever podcast and he was confronted by a Catholic girl, because he talked about how he's in a monogamous relationship with his baby mama, but he can't be in a monogamous relationship because he needs to have access to other sexual partners, and that she's okay with that. And the Catholic girl brought up, well, isn't that a sign of weakness that you can't control yourself? And he kind of fumbled it, because really that's what it points at. The red pill and the manosphere try to highlight that if you have a girl and you can get her to be okay with you being able to, sleep around on the side, it shows that, well, that's just natural to men's behavior. And she just has to recognize that you're a high value man. And because you're high value, it comes with the territory. No, like, again, what is the value? The value is material. No, my value is not material. My value has to do with my relationship to God and these transcendent energies and virtues. So to me, honor and me dying, when I die, and the people that are at my funeral, God willing, it is more valuable to me that they say I was an incredibly honest, a person full of integrity, a brave, and I had honor and people respected me.
Mm-hmm.
That is way more valuable than me having millions of dollars or $1 billion and I die and everybody's like, man, he was an asshole. He was so self-conceited. Everything was about him. Like,
Right.
what are we living for?
Yeah.
And the thing is that a man, and this is the difference, this is why materialism is such a problem, is that a man, what he lives for, other than his family, other than his blood, are things that we can't touch.
Mm.
Truth, love, mercy, compassion, honor, glory. These things, you can't touch any of these things. And these are what separate us from animals. And so as people become more materialistic, one, their vision on these transcendent values is diminished. And they literally are becoming more like animals because they're neglecting the part that separates us from the rest of creation.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. Even, when you look in the animal kingdom, I mean, at least they recognize gender, human being.
Yeah. We're getting so out of whack now that we can't even recognize the obvious in our society, which, I mean,
Yeah.
I really don't know how it turns around. I assume it has to crash and burn. And then the only thing that's going to emerge is that which has stood the test of time. I mean, when Western society really collapses, be it the collapse of the US dollar, be it an EMP attack where, our grid goes down, and when things really hit the fan and the lifestyle and the world that we live in is going to be gone, the only thing that's going to exist is that which can stand the test of time. And that's where I think traditional people that have traditional marriages that have multiple children, we win in a generation or two.
Yeah.
You see, the people that are trying to fight the culture war and they're trying to fix it before they die, they've already lost. This didn't happen in one generation. We didn't get here in one generation. This took hundreds of years. And so if you're then thinking that you're going to start a podcast and you're going to fix it, that's pride, that's delusion. And you're already afraid of the fact that it's not going to change before you die. So how do you change it? I'm going to change it by having 5 or more children. I'm going to change it by having children that are raised in a traditional structure that, God willing, when they're adults, they continue in the line that I try to lay down for them and the foundation that I try to provide for them. That's the best thing I can do as a man. And that's how we change. If the average person, all first world countries are below replacement rate. So in the next generation, I mean, world population is going to drop significantly. So if that's already the case, then all these people that, whether it be part of the rainbow mafia or even these secular people that are on birth control, that want to have children, the DINK thing, dual income, no kid phenomenon, they've already lost. They can go have their vacations, go to SeaWorld. I don't care, because when my children and my children's children are alive, we're going to be on top because we're going to be the majority of the population.
Yeah. Well, I would say promoting your ideas as well and refuting all of the bad ideologies out there help as well.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't mean to say they don't help. I meant to say that the sinking of the Titanic, using that as a metaphor for Western civilization, this isn't going to get fixed in our lifetime. It's not. It's just, there's no way. The government is the biggest enemy of the people in all first world countries. I mean, maybe not in Korea or Japan, where they have much more of a homogenous and understanding of a self-identity. But in America, I mean, what connects Americans? What is the overarching ethos? And it's not just about race. It's about, like, what is the project we're all contributing into? And I would argue half the country hates the country. And so civil war, balkanization, I mean, these things seem inevitable. I don't know when. I hope they don't happen.
Yeah.
But my point about I think talking about it is massively beneficial. That's why I try to talk about it. That's why we're having our conversation today. So I think it's incredibly powerful on the individual level, right? How many young men have altered course and seen the world differently by listening to yourself or other people talking about these topics? But as a society, the cultural momentum is so strong that it's going to take a generation or two before the inertia slows down.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that people who are thinking long term are already going to win, because it's about children. It's about family. It's about values. It's about things that can't be destroyed and that are true and
Right.
good
Yeah.
and beautiful.
Absolutely. You said you did a video talking about the Spartans and the mindset of the Spartans, and you made a very powerful quote. I had to listen to this a few times. You said you have to be more willing to die for eternity than live for temporalities. And I was driving when I heard that. I was like, man, that was serious. And I think a lot of people look at life, and a lot of people think, well, it's all about happiness. And I was listening to Frank Turek, who he's a Christian apologist, and he said, well, it's really not all about happiness. I mean, you may not be happy, and
Right.
the Bible does talk about presenting yourself as a living sacrifice.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately what will make somebody happier. Because as a man, I'm not a woman. I'm not going to speak on the women's context of this, but as a man, men are goal oriented. And so if you get every material thing that you wanted today, what is your motivation for your day? Like, what is your motivation for life? Where are you going? And I think a man who says, well, I don't need anything. I got all the money I need. I got all the resources. I'm just going to sit here and chill rest of my life. You can. And I'm
Yeah,
not saying that they wouldn't even make it to the kingdom. They may be a great person, but as a masculine imperative, I mean, I don't see that being something that's honorable.
yeah,
And that's where, you have these millionaire children and their failure to launch. They never go out on their own way because they already have everything. What's the incentive? What's the goal? That's where people, I come from a sort of lower middle class family. I'm not wealthy at all, but there's a North Star. There's an incentive that's tied with God and hopefully having a family and providing and protecting for them. So, that Spartan video, I think as a man, and that's where I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge history buff. So like in my meantime, I love watching YouTube channels like Kings and Generals, History Marque, History TV, where they go over the details of various military battles throughout history, all cultures, all peoples. I love looking at the history because it shows men were so willing to fight and die for their people, for their nations, for their religion. I just don't see that. And that's where
yeah,
I'm worried about Europe with the mass immigration, particularly the immigrants that are moving there, is that they're working, the average Muslim man with their Muslim worldview, they're operating on they're moving on an operating system that is deemed antiquated in the West.
mhm,
And so the Western man, what are they going to fight and die for? They've already given everything up.
yeah. That's a good point that you brought up. I think you were talking in your conversation with Jay Dyer on the Red Pill. You were talking about the Muslim society respecting the patriarchy and the women respecting the patriarchy, whereas the Western man and Western civilization is pretty much discarding the patriarchy. I have a younger brother who is Muslim, and he is following traditional Islam, whereas my father was in the Nation of Islam. But he's, I think, maybe early 20s, and he's considering getting married and finding a wife, and to the point where he's so disgusted with the West that he wants to move to the East. And there's a part of me that says, man, I respect the fact that you want to follow traditional values, but at the same time, I don't agree with with Islam's ideology. What do you say to the church and to those that are looking for direction, and they're considering Islam because they're looking at the West and they're seeing, man, you guys are weak. You're not willing to die for anything. Your values are just lost. What do you say to men that are seeking value and looking for direction in that area?
So I would first delineate the fact that I'm Eastern Orthodox. And so all those criticisms you laid at the West, I would agree with. We have a shared history. So Christian history, to be very precise and quick, there was a single church for the first millennium. The Bishop of Rome, who we now call the Pope, The Pope was a sort of honorific term designated to him due to the significance of Rome and the Roman Empire. But the capital of the Roman Empire was moved to Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. And we have, over 1,000 years of Byzantine history. It's the longest empire in world history, was an Orthodox Christian empire. And the West, I would argue that because of this pernicious element that got, we can see the seeds of it back during the scholastic period. So the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1400s, this idea of progress. Now, I'm not saying we can't progress as society and that refrigeration and antibiotics aren't good things. My point is material progress viewed as the indicative measure of progress, which really gets going and has a fulfillment in the Enlightenment period. I mean, that's why we have incredibly degenerate and immoral people, and yet they are the ones that are promoting the most progress, right? That they are progressives. So the West has built its whole entire ethos. One, it did away with God and moved away from tradition in favor of this idea of progress and becoming more progressive. Now, obviously, progressive ideas in the 1600s were very different than progressive ideas in 2024, but the foundational presuppositions have already been laid. Orthodox Christianity is explicit that we don't change. That's one of the big differences between Catholicism, which has had all these papal statements, speaking ex cathedra from the seat of Peter, altering the church. Vatican I, Vatican II, Pope Francis, all these encyclicals that he lays out, and is now okay with same-sex unions, not marriage, but now they're unions. Well, this is a progressive understanding of revelation. But God revealed himself, and truth doesn't change. Truth is the same person at the beginning of time as at the end of time. I believe truth is a who, not a what. When Christ said, I am the truth, that is a capital T. And so all smaller truths lead you towards the realization of who Jesus Christ is. So I believe all rabbit holes, I don't care if you're going down the Fed Reserve or DARPA, cyber warfare, all of it comes back to an understanding that there's an objective morality, there's an objective truth. And I think if you go deeper, eventually that Jesus Christ, that God really did become man. In regards to Islam, see, Orthodoxy, that's why I wanted to lay that out first and foremost, because Catholicism still has a patriarchy in a male ordained priest class. So does Orthodoxy. I would argue Orthodoxy is much more patriarchal and masculine than the Roman Church, as we've seen many of the progressive sentiments be expressed since Vatican II. So the West and Western Christianity is really, especially if we're speaking in the Anglo context, it's Protestantism. And Protestantism is built on the precept that as long as I have my Bible, I can read it, and then my interpretation is the truth of whatever's being revealed. But we know that that's just subjectivism. Everybody, we can all read the same story. We can read Huck Finn, and all these different people can read it and have different interpretations of what's being said, what was the most meaningful part, why the author put this in there. So you need an arbiter to distinguish correct interpretation. So that would be the church. So then, because Protestantism is built on the presupposition that they don't need that with sola scriptura, it leads to a cultural presupposition that I have my own truth, that your opinion is equal to my opinion. And we see this relativism of truth, which is ultimately demonic, because if we don't believe in truth exists, then what's the point of talking? What's the point of having conversation? What's the point? What are we moving towards? Well, nothing. And that is really the postmodern malaise after the 1950s and 60s in the academy. That's what postmodernism is. It says there is no objective truth. You can no longer make universal truth claims because everything is socially constructed, and therefore it depends on which culture you're in. Something may be right, like genital mutilation may be right in that country, but no, that's immoral in this country. Well, why is it immoral? Well, it's immoral because we said it's immoral. We've decided.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's just social construction, because we could then decide tomorrow that it's not immoral. So there is no objective truth. That's why I think Islam is so appealing to so many young men right now. Obviously, way more people in the world know what Islam is than Eastern Orthodox Christianity. But I would argue that the Orthodox Church is the alternative to Islam because it has all the things that Islam offers, which is more traditional society, a patriarchal understanding of the relationship between men and women, purity amongst women in regards to being married. So there's many attributes about Islam that I would agree with, and I wish that we celebrated those things more in the West. But in the Orthodox Church, we do put an emphasis on those. So young men, they're West. For example, in England, I've seen this massive increase of native English males converting to Islam, and these are obviously white guys. And the reason they're doing it, when you talk to them, is because, like we mentioned earlier, you said there's nothing to die for. Well, I said that and you reiterated it. It's because, what is their identity? So if you're a white man and you're in England and your family's been there for centuries, and now you're told that, you have white privilege, you're the problem, your culture is really no longer English. If you go to London, only 30% of the people that live in London are actually Englishmen. So what are you going to do? How are you going to stop? And then also, all these young men are recognizing the degeneracy. So we just talked about the red pill, the manosphere. We see the state of Western women. We see the state of Western society. Most people have figured out that the fiat currency exists and the whole thing's built on debt, and they're trying to enslave us in every way possible. What's the alternative? Well, if you only are aware of Catholicism and then these Protestant churches, which half the Protestant churches promote LGBTQ stuff, half the Protestant churches have female ministers, which is explicitly stated by Paul in the epistles that a woman's place is not to lead men, especially it's not to speak in the church. Now, that's not a diminution of women, because we believe that Mary, a fully human person, gave birth to God due to her purity and her relationship to God. So we do not diminish women, but when you transgress such obvious points of the Christian faith, again, it's built on relativism, because they would say, well, yeah, that's what Paul said back then, but that's not true now. No, if it's true then, it's true now, because truth doesn't change.
Right.
And so at least with Islam, that's so appealing to men, is something that doesn't change. And so that's why getting into like a traditional form of Islam, be it Sunni or Shiite, I could see why that'd be appealing, because now at least you have an identity, you have a focus oriented towards God, you have a culture that's going to reinforce your value system, and you have access to potential mates and women that you could marry that are going to be much more pure, and they're going to submit to you. Why? Not because you have money, not because of your six pack, not because of your social status, but because of the tradition, their faith in God. Getting back to my point about orthodoxy earlier in Western women.
Yeah.
The problem is, though, if I was going to do apologetics, and I don't want to turn this into that, but once you start doing apologetics in regards to the contradictions within the Quran, its consistency, its preservation, the theology itself, all these different things, I think you can make a strong philosophical case for Christianity being philosophically and theologically superior to Islam. The problem is, it's hard to do that when Islam is at least still preserving its tradition and its culture, and we in the West, I have to point to Russia or Romania as an example. Well, most people aren't familiar with that. Look at the entire West has fallen away from God. Nietzsche made the proclamation in the 1800s that God was dead, and it is for most people. He obviously, I'm a Christian, so God isn't dead. But for most people in our society, it is. And so now the state is God. The state is the arbiter of truth. And if that's the case, we're all leading towards communism, because that's the beginning point of communism.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd like to see where the Muslim world is in a few years, because it seems like places like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, they're becoming a little bit more westernized. So I'm curious to see what that's going to be like in terms of their values. In one of your videos, you talk about the New World Order and globalism and this one world system coming about. And you said, I think it was your conversation with Dyer, you said that before that happens, first there has to be a feminization of men in order to bring that about. Can you expound on that and maybe touch a little bit on migration?
So to use a metaphor that I like to talk about in regards to understanding a sort of crude example of what masculinity is, at least in my perspective, is that men and masculinity maintains boundaries. So before I came back to God, I had a promiscuous, era in my 20s and was really into psychedelics, new age, Eastern spirituality, that type of thing. And then one of the things that are celebrated about psychedelics is that they dissolve boundaries. So the boundaries between my perception of myself and you, I realize, oh, we're all one. The boundary between me and an animal, the boundary between me and a tree, the boundary between, ultimately spiritually, between the veil between created space time and the eternal realm. And so I absolutely, through my own experiences, know that you can take high dose psychedelics or get into altered states of consciousness and contact entities that are non-local and that are outside space and time. So masculinity maintains boundaries. So when I like to say that masculinity is the castle walls and women and children are the jewels within. Throughout history, without exception, men knew this and they would fight and die for their women and children. Period. Point blank. Didn't matter what religion, what language. That was the point of the men. And so men maintain boundaries, but that includes the boundaries between male and female, the boundaries between nation states, the boundaries between truthhood and falsehood. And so we see in Western society, choose a boundary and it's being blurred deliberately because it causes feminization and it causes this hermaphroditic androgynous society, because the boundary between male and female is being dissolved in the, whether you want to focus on the transgender movement or whatever. But when you start reading the literature on transhumanism, I mean, the people that really have the money and are pulling a lot of strings, that's what they want. They want an androgynous society because it'd be, one, much easier to control, because getting back to the boundary thing, it's masculine men that have women and children in some type of transcendent value system that are going to fight to the death. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to want to take over the world and form a one world global culture, one of the first things you want to do is focus on the first world nations, and you want to feminize all those men so they won't fight and resist the fact that you're taking the entire planet to a third or second world state. Mm. So the first world nations are the first ones that have to go, and therefore the men in those countries are the first ones that have to be feminized, and you have to dissolve all those boundaries so that they don't have a boundary to defend, because that's what men do. And so you look at, whether it be the New World Order, look at the chants by Antifa that no border, no wall, no USA at all. It's literally explicit. So in their communist utopia, they don't want nation states. And this is why nationalism is such a threat to the globalists, because nationalism maintains an identity. If I'm a man and I'm in, choose a country, we'll choose the United States because that's where we're at. If I'm an American, my identity is American. And therefore the dissolving of that nation is a dissolving of so much of my society and my own identity. It's going to cause havoc in the dissolution of my own family, the dissolution of my own society, the dissolution of my local community. These are the things men offer more than they take. Masculinity, again, just like we're talking about pleasure, no man in history is celebrated because he took more than he gave. No, the point is to take what you need and you actually give more. That's why, again, I would argue Christ is the ultimate masculine figure, because he gave everything and took nothing. Mm-hmm. And so as we move towards a central one world government, which is explicitly the case, and I think that Islam is going to be much more accepting of that because of the general theology that they are going to spread to every part of the world and forcibly spread the word of Allah, and that you're either going to convert or you're going to pay the jizya, which is the tax. So if you're a non-Muslim in a Muslim nation, you pay an extra tax. And that's always been the way that Islam has worked throughout history, or you fight to the death. So that's explicit in the Islamic eschatology. And mm-hmm. So my point in bringing that up, I know I'm bringing up a lot of points together, but as we move towards a new world order and a globalized framework, they're going to have to get, that's why I think the mobilization of Muslims is so important, because they still have those traditional values. And as you export them to Europe, they're going to naturally try to take over those countries, which is going to cause internal chaos, which is going to be beneficial for the degradation of those societies, so that it's going to be way more easy to control. And so this fight is all about masculinity. Right. The movement towards globalism is all about masculinity, because it's only masculine traditional men that could stop it or willing to stop it.
Yeah.
Because tell me, why would a secular man give up his life? That's why a secular man is going to be in a coom pod with a VR headset with all the bugs and all the food that he could be taken in through IV. And he's going to be looking at the most whatever his pleasure system is. He's going to be, a character in Star Wars, or he's going to be watching porn all day because all his pleasures will be satisfied.
Yeah.
And that's the weakest form of a man you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so the men that are willing to die and defend the boundaries of their people, of their religion, of their local communities, of their nations, these are enemy number one. And so flooding countries with different immigrants, and I'm not against people at all. I want everybody to thrive, and I think diversity is good in the sense that God created everybody. So I don't want to live in a world where Ethiopians don't exist. I don't want to live in a world where Japanese people don't exist. But what we're moving towards is the relativism. So globalism is inherently relative. And that's where you look at things like the Pope and the development of what's called Chrislam. So in Abu Dhabi, they have the Abrahamic Faith Center, where they have a synagogue, a mosque, and a Catholic church. And they're all saying that that they all worship the same God. And this is time for ecumenism and coming together. Well, I worship a Trinity. So my God is Trinitarian, and I believe the Logos, who's the second person, became flesh. Does a Muslim believe that? No.
Yeah.
Does a Jew believe that? No. So we're not worshiping the same God. We may come from a general Abrahamic tradition, but my God is explicitly Trinitarian. And so in Islam and Judaism, those aren't Trinitarian deities. So we don't worship the same God.
Right.
But the fact that we can then come together and say that we are, this is a dissolution of truth. This is relativism. This is subjectivism. And this is how they're going to get everybody into accepting it. And I think ultimately it's spiritual.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, we're all going to have to make a decision on what we're going to do and how far we're willing to accept what's coming. Digital currencies, 15-minute cities, everything on the electric grid, social credit scores. I mean, it's all coming. It's all going to happen in the next 5 years.
Yeah. I always say,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I always say, people don't genuinely believe in relativism because when it comes to their everyday life, they don't practice relativism when it comes to their bank account. Or if they want truth from their spouse or their kids, they ask. They want truth from their spouses and kids. If they're stopping at a red light in traffic, they want truth. But when it comes to spiritual matters, it just boils down to the human the human soul wanting to get away from God and abandon truth for personal pleasure.
And that's the deal that the devil always makes us.
Yeah.
Because the whole point is that you have to deny the truth, and in consequence, then you won't be killed or you won't have to sacrifice something. That's not the way I want to go out.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the way most men who actually have a purpose want to go out, because we know that that's the weakness.
Absolutely.
And I think most men are willing to exchange the things that our ancestors gave us for pleasure. Because the consequence and what is going to be asked of us is going to be so immense that most men just aren't willing to step up to that plate because it's not going to be fun. But again, the point isn't fun. But if we're told everything's about happiness and fun, they're not going to choose that path. And that's why I think you look at the West since World War II, how fast has our society degraded? I mean, it is unreal.
Yeah.
And it's because we've lived in this prosperous time and period where we didn't have all these wars. I get the war machine of the United States, the military industrial complex. So I'm not going to say that hasn't existed. But my point is, like, Americans or Europeans since World War II haven't faced real threats, real war, real civil tensions. And it's coming.
Yeah.
And it's going to forcibly weed people out. And I think the people who've already exchanged, as you said, the spiritual truth is a hard one for people to get over and really be objective about and stand on that business, like they don't want to do that because that's going to be difficult. And so, I just see this falling apart of the Western man, because he's going to exchange pleasure for everything that was given to him. And in turn, it's going to get more difficult. So you don't, any deal you make with the devil isn't a genuine, because he can't engage in truth, because that's the uncreated
Exactly.
energy of God. So whatever deal you make with him, you won't have to sacrifice today, but you're gonna, you're gonna die from obesity or cancers or all these different things because you didn't do XYZ to fight against it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Even, I mean, when you read scripture, I mean, Christ, the scripture talks about the narrow gate. Narrow is the gate that leads to eternal life. And broad is the way that leads to destruction. A lot of people do take the broad way in life. And basically what that scripture is saying is that a lot of people are going to hell. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very narrow, and you could just boil it down to the basic areas in everyday life. A lot of people don't want to work hard. A lot of people want the fast way. They want quick pleasures. So
Amen.
when it comes to eternity, I mean, it is sad to say, I think about this often, but a lot of people, unfortunately, unless they change their past, myself, included, I feel convicted.
Me included. I was part of that. I was
Right.
part of the problem.
Right. Exactly.
I probably still am to
Yeah.
many degrees. That's the humility to realize that I'm still a sinner and I'm still contributing to ills that I'm trying to articulate and criticize as well. But that's part of the Christian life, is to realize that we're constantly hypocrites. But the point is to repent and get up and try again and try again and try again and stop trying to participate in the fallenness of creation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think so many, it's going to, the deal with the devil is ultimately going to lead to the submission of the Antichrist. And that's where globalism ends. And that's where, that's where once you bring up the Antichrist of the end times, people begin to roll your eyes like, oh, you're one of those Christians. And I'm not saying when that begins or when it is. As an Orthodox Christian, we know that as soon as the cornerstone's laid for the third temple, we have entered the time of tribulation. So you see CBS News just did an article this past week about the red heifers that were purchased from Texas, because part of their prophecy is they have to sacrifice 2 perfect red heifers. Well, they purchased them. It's in Israel, and they just built a sacrificial ramp. And we know that Israel's going to blow up the Dome of the Rock. So the mosque that's in Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and they're going to build the third temple. And as soon as that cornerstone's laid, that's when I will be one of those people that I proclaim I'm not by saying we're in the end times. But it's going to come down to people just accepting the worldliness, because the Antichrist is going to be a political and a military leader. And so according to their prophecy, so as an Orthodox Christian, my Messiah already came. So the Messiah that's prophesied by the Jewish tradition is my Antichrist.
Yeah.
That's how that works. And so who they believe is coming as their Mashiach is my Antichrist, and he's going to rule a one world government, and he's going to be worshiped as God because he's going to end famine. He's going to end world disease. He's going to end an economic collapse, almost like everything that's being instantiated right now. And I speculate, due to my research on transhumanism, because that's what I write about academically, is I believe he's going to be, I have a lot of theories. We don't need to get into that about, the endpoints of AI and all that different stuff. But on transhumanism, I believe that the Antichrist probably will be transhuman. And so he'll have access to, whatever AI system is at development there, he's going to be tuned into that. So Satan does not have the same attributes as God. He is not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. He doesn't know what's going to happen in the future to the same degree as God. So with the technology that we are building, because we are made in the image of God, Satan and the demons, the fallen angels, they cannot create. So they are getting us, and I'm not saying technology is evil in and of itself. Obviously, we're using technology to spread, positive, a message about Christ and everything that's going on in the world right now. Technology doesn't have a will. From an Orthodox perspective, the only thing that can be evil is something that has a will. Therefore, angels, demons, and us are the only thing that can truly be evil. But I imagine as we move towards the end times, and once the Antichrist emerges, that him being the child of Satan, that he will be able to know what's going on in Beijing, China, what's in your bank account in America, revolutions in Rio de Janeiro. He'll know all of that. And so people, when they encounter him as a person, will believe him to be a god, because he's going to be hooked up to this whole system that is anti-human, which is the point, because Satan can't get back at God. He can only take us to where he is condemned. because they sinned in eternity. And so the whole game of spiritual warfare is that you and I are given the privilege to be inside space and time because we can repent. We can make a wrong decision and then change direction, and God forgives us and we can make it to the kingdom. But because Lucifer wanted to be worshipped as God and he sinned in eternity, by definition, he can't change that. And
Right.
so the third of the angelic hierarchy that fell with him, they can't change. They're outside space and time. They already see the beginning and the end, and they know their end point. So the only way they can get back at the Trinity is to take us where they're going. And they're going to do that by getting us to give away the image of God in us. So hook up with Neuralink, give over access to your brain, access to your thoughts, access to your mobility. I did a whole stream on the history of brain implants, and it's scary.
Yeah.
They can literally control you like a robot. And so this whole thing about Neuralink being for the paraplegic, that's how it always begins. But if you go to Neuralink's website, it's explicit that their whole point is a human AI symbiosis. And the only way that Elon Musk thinks that we can stop the AI, because again, he believes in a sentient AGI, which I do not believe because it doesn't have a soul. But because he believes in a sentient AGI, he believes the only way to stop it from annihilating all humanity is that we have to basically blend with it and allow it to be inside of us. That is demonic. And that is moving us towards this inverted place where I think the majority of the world's going to be okay with it. And that's why they're going to bow down and worship the Antichrist.
Since you brought that up, I got a few more points before we wrap up. But
okay.
I mean, when you look at the pandemic and how that came about, and the solution, so-called solution that was given to us, the juice, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And you look at people that compromised when it came to that and succumb to those pressures to maybe keep their job, because they had to take this thing. I think that time was kind of like a foreshadowing of what may be to come in terms of these forms of technologies like the Neuralink and things like that, just giving away your humanity, in exchange for the lie. So that kind of, it's telling to see what would happen in the future. And, I was surprised to see how some family and some friends, what direction they went in when it came to that. But it does give you an indication.
Absolutely. And may I make a quick point on
Sure.
that? So I agree with you totally about the technology that was used to alter DNA, and that being an irreversible condition that I'm aware of as of today. But why were people so willing to do that when that didn't even come out until a year afterwards? Is because of fear. And so scripture is so explicit about not making decisions based on fear, because that's what the evil one has. And so God says, if you follow me, do not fear, over. And it's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament, over and over and over. And so the only way that this system works in getting us to give away the most prized possession of ourselves, the image of God within us, is he has to use fear, and he has to get us to acquiesce to it, because our free will is made in the image of God. God has free will. God chose to freely create, and he gave us this by being made in the image. And so they want to violate your free will by getting you to consent to something that really you're not fully aware of. Therefore, they're not held liable, because if you consent to it, you're guilty for your choice. That's the nature of sin. That's the nature of being given free will. And so if you're making choices based on fear, and then fear of death, right? Because if you're a Christian, that is not the biggest thing. Death is not the biggest thing for me to be afraid of. Now, I'm not saying that I'm willing to die today. Absolutely not. And I pray God doesn't put me to the test, because I'm afraid of what I may do if I was put into a position of some of the martyrs throughout the church. But that is the spiritual game, is that they can only manipulate you through fear. And that's the fear porn that's on social media, the fear porn that's on mainstream news. That's why it's there. That is part of a satanic agenda to alter your ability to perceive reality and get you to acquiesce, and with your free will choose something that is ultimately for your own demise.
Yeah. Going back to the feminization of men, I till this day I still find this disturbing. Well, I'm always going to find it disturbing, but when President Biden got elected, I don't know if it was last year, a few years ago, when he started promoting the transformer ideology. He had a conversation with Dylan Mulvaney, and there was another comedian he talked to in regards to this topic. And he said that, if your child wants to, if you have a son, I'm paraphrasing, but if your child, in essence, who may be a boy, wants to remove his private parts and exchange them for something else because your little son wants to be a girl,
Mm-hmm.
You should love that child and go along with it because that's flesh of your flesh and bone of your bone. This is what the president of the United States said. And, when I look at that, I'm just like, wow, man, this guy he's 80 years old. This is a man who, 80 years old. You would think living that long, you would have some wisdom and through experience, you would gain principle. But at 80 years old, to deny truth and to, be incorrect on something so fundamental and basic is just amazing. It's horrible. But more than that, I see men that vote for this. Mm-hmm. Not only men our age, but men that grew up in a whole different generation going along with this. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about elders that support this. And so when we talk about the feminization of men, when I see that older men are willing to support that right there just shows me that they have just compromised ultimately. To support that, you're going along with this system, this satanic system, and you are abandoning your masculinity.
Yes.
By supporting something like that. And
yeah, absolutely. And so how can an older person who's going along with it, one, they deep down, they probably do know the difference, but they don't want to be called a name. There was a video that was going viral. It was a TikTok video. I saw it on X, but it was a grandmother who was asked by, it looked like an OnlyFans chick, about her grandchildren. She said, "Oh yeah, I have granddaughters that are 6 and 8." And she said, "Okay, well, if they wanted to transition their gender, would you support it?" "Oh yes, I'd be so proud of them for being who they are, and coming to the realization of who they want to be." And then she said, "Well, would you be okay if they got a tattoo?" "Oh no, a tattoo is permanent. I would definitely tell them not to get a tattoo." And the dissonance there, the disconnect between putting your child on hormones is permanent. It's going to alter their body for the rest of their lives. But you're more upset about a tattoo. Well, tattoo, it's still culturally okay to be like, yeah, I'm not into tattoos. But is it culturally okay for you to say, no, transgenderism is a terrible ideology. It's anti-human. It's ultimately demonic. And pushing that on children is, explicitly satanic. No, you can't say that because you're going to be called names. And the fact that men are so willing to capitulate because they don't want to be called a name. And we see this with really prominent men, somebody like The Rock, an incredibly physically masculine, successful man who I guarantee you, if he had a son, would not want him to be a homosexual or trans. Yet because of the money, because of his prominence in society, he won't ever speak out against. Same thing with Kevin Hart. He apologized because of a joke he made like 10 years ago about if his son was gay or not. That he talking about what he would do to him to try to make him straight. He apologized for that. Well, why are people so weak? The names and it's all about money. It's all about material. Right. And so just because people might tarnish your reputation by calling you a bigot or a homophobe, people are willing to alter everything. Yeah. And when it comes to like somebody like the Joe Biden, when you laid that example, orthodoxy teaches that, just trying to lay this out quickly. So we believe in the energy essence distinction of the Godhead. And the way that we believe we engage with God directly is through these uncreated energies, these things that I mentioned earlier, like love and truth and honor and glory and bravery and courage and mercy and compassion. You can't touch any of these things. And no animal recognizes fully what those things are because they can't participate it. We do because we're made in the image of God. And so we believe that as somebody lives a more and more degenerate life, their what we would call their nous or their noetic faculties, it gets darker, darker. And so they can't see reality. And therefore they are succumbing to the demons more and more and more. And so when you look at the Biden crime family, I mean, look at what Joe Biden had to say about immigration in the 1970s and 80s versus his open border policy in 2024. Well, that's because a man has no principles. You look at the Burisma scheme, you look at Hunter Biden's involvement in China and all these different countries. It's about money, it's about power, it's about worldly attributes. And so I wouldn't be surprised if for some of these people that they are so given over to their passions and their own temptations and demons that they couldn't turn around if they wanted to and come out of that. Like something dramatic would have to happen in their life. And that's why usually, be it an arrest or a divorce, like something usually traumatic has to happen for people to come back to God.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't necessarily the case for me, but different people have different contexts in their own life. But I think what we're seeing then around the world is that they're getting people to just give in just a little bit, and then just a little bit more, and just a little bit more. I mean, just think, it was in 2014 when gay marriage became legal in the United States. 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Think of how different our country is in 10 years. Everything that people warned against about the slippery slope is true. Right now in Canada and in parts of the US, if you fail to recognize the gender of a trans child and they're your own child, and you're saying, no, you're Mark, the state can now come and take your children away. And in Canada, they just passed a law this past week where now if you're found guilty of hate or hate speech or hateful activity, it can come to a life sentence in Canada. That's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary because who's deeming what's hateful?
Right.
And so people that were just protesting a drag queen story hour were mentioned as perpetuating hate and being guilty of these crimes that are, now on the books, or going to be on the books in Canada. That's scary. And so you see how the devil inverts everything, because as you mentioned in your Joe Biden example, that, you want to love them, that they're your own, flesh, and they're your own, your own blood, that that's not what love is. You see, love is in the context oriented towards God. And so if you truly love your children, you want to protect them from the inversion. And so love is now being repackaged as the opposite. It's about acceptance. Well, when was love about acceptance? You accept your wife having multiple sexual partners? That's love? I mean, no. Love, it comes with boundaries.
Yeah.
And honesty, integrity, and commitment is within that boundary, and that's how we express love to each other.
Right.
And so the whole thing is inverted. The idea of social justice as opposed to justice, it's all inverted. And, we don't need these modifiers for these terms. And the reason why the modifiers are used is because anybody who's studied ritualistic magic knows that it's all about language. God, the logos, is the word of God. Language is something that is incredibly mysterious and mystical that we are participating in. I'm making noises with my mouth, and we're communicating complex ideas to each other.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know language, it just sounds like garbage. I mean, if you didn't know English, it just sounds like gibberish.
Right.
But language and the manipulation of language manipulates and alters the map that the mind is working on. And that's what they're doing. So by redefining what words mean, they're redefining the mental landscape that people are operating in without them even knowing it.
Oh, man. Dropping some jewels today. Last few points. What would you say to men who are saying, David, listen, society, Western civilization, it's collapsing. America's collapsing. I think I'm just going to pack my bags. I'm going to head over to, I don't know, Costa Rica or something. What do you say to people that are, I guess, washing their hands and saying, I'm finished. I want to take my family to a different country or a different area where the values are better?
Mm-hmm. So my response is, it's not a one person fits all, because I know I have friends that have left the United States. And it depends on your context. Now, I'll explain why for me, that's not in my cards. For some people, maybe that is an option, that you aren't strongly connected with your immediate family, and maybe you just have a wife and children and you're not really connected with your parents or your siblings, or maybe they're all dead or something like that, and you can kind of translocate because you don't feel any allegiance to the country or where you're at specifically. And that's fine. I mean, I don't think that's going to be held against somebody as a sin or something like that. That's going to be detrimental to their own salvation. And as a man, this is where you got to make that decision, because maybe for some men that is the correct move based on their context. For me, that is not what my context is. My mother has a rare form of muscular dystrophy, and I feel an obligation to not leave, but to fight. And so if all the good men left all the first world countries, it's already game over. And I think there is a bit of a carrot that's being put in front of us to do exactly that. And what is your identity when you move to a country that you're not those people, and that's not your first language? Now, again, I'm saying for some people that might be the right move. I don't know everybody's context, but for me, I feel an obligation to stand and fight. And again, it's part of my own martyrdom. I think that God's providence, as true with every person on the planet, has put you in a particular culture, a particular people group, racial group, ethnic group. And I think the masculine response to what's happening is to not leave. I mean, because where are you going to go? Eventually, it's coming for everywhere. Like we said, if the New World Order and globalism is true, it doesn't matter. You can't hide. If you go to the top of the mountain in Costa Rica, it's just a matter of time before they get there.
Yeah.
And maybe you're able to live a off the grid lifestyle in Costa Rica and have, access to all the nutrients, and you're able to live a thriving lifestyle with your family. That's what I'm saying. My prescription is not for everybody, but Orthodox Christianity explicitly has multiple saints that would be symbolic of the fact that we don't leave, that when times get worse, that's more reason for us to fight against it. And so I think it's a question of like embracing the battle. But which battle are you embracing? Again, for some people, maybe it is the move. I would say for the vast majority of people, that what is motivating you to leave? And it's like I don't want to engage. I don't want to have to fight.
Yeah.
I want to find somewhere where there's peace. Well, that's not your providence. That's not my providence. Yeah. And I feel like my salvation and the context that God put for me is to take care of my parents, to take care of my family, to get married, to have children, and I'm not leaving. And the only way I'm going out is through God's will, and that may be through imprisonment, that may be through a bullet by somebody. I don't know what it is. I hope it's none of that. I hope I'm able to live a long life, but that's the battle in my mind. That's what I would articulate as like a warrior mentality for God. That is not like I'm going out and being aggressive. That's where I think they're trying to. We know that the CIA and the FBI, they have all these feds that have infiltrated all these groups, and they're trying to provoke people to participate in violence so that they can use it against you. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, and this is what I express on my channel, is that the Orthodox Church has already laid out, as we talked about earlier, a patriarchal tradition that I believe is the true church founded by the apostles in Christ. And it has already laid out its values. And as of right now, even though there's a lot of turmoil within it right now because of progressive elements that have already infiltrated, it hasn't changed its core values. And so if you're against a lot of the stuff we've articulated, there is a perimeter that has already been laid out by the church. I think it's the role then of men to find a local parish, belong to a local community, and that perimeter is where we stand and we look at the world, and nothing can cause us to retreat. Not one step back on our values. Not one step back. And that is a warrior mentality that's not necessarily aggressive or offensive in regards to not offending people, but offensive in regards to like going and killing your enemy. Oh, the deep state's at work. We got to go take these people out. No, that's not how it works. You got to let God's providence, we deserve the country we're in. Look how many babies have been aborted since the 60s.
Yeah.
we deserve what we have. That's the problem. And so if we're living, and that is the story of the entire Old Testament, as Israel fell away from God, he brought the barbarous tribes and the other people to subjugate them and rule over them. That's exactly what's happening right now. So the only option then for me from an Orthodox perspective is to stand on that perimeter of the church and with other men, allow the women and children to be inside the safety of the church. And I'm using that as a metaphorical sense. And we don't take one step back. And if that leads to us being imprisoned, if that leads to us being killed, then so be it. So be it. At least if I go out that way, I have a clean conscience, and God willing, I've repented from as many sins that I've committed, and that I could stand in front of the judgment seat of Christ. Safely and securely. But I think it depends on people. It depends on where you're at. My fiance, she's German. And so I see what's going on in Germany and Europe. And I still feel, even with the mass immigration, with an open southern border, I'd rather her be here than me go to Europe, and that at least we can build our lifestyle and protect it and see how things go in another decade or two.
Yeah. Do you think the church can, or the church has dropped the ball or compromised when it comes to training men or guiding men in terms of how to be strong in Christ and how to be strong believers and not surrender their principles to the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, I think that's what the Catholic Church is having its internal fight over. The Pope banned the Latin Mass. And so the traditional Latin Mass, I'm not Catholic, obviously, but those people are much more fervent about the tradition of the church, and they don't want it changed. Well, Pope Francis is in the business of a one world government and ecumenism. So he wants to change the values and some of the core tenets so that it'd be more accommodating to what's getting ready to come into place. So the Catholic Church has an internal struggle over these traditional people that don't want to surrender their values versus the rest of the church that says, well, the Pope has made a decision. It's okay. I mean, I guess that's what we believe now. And when you look historically at Christian nations, there's militaries, there's orders of knights, there's men that are explicit about the defense of their countrymen and their values and their traditions. Where's that in the West? Are all the trans that are in the military, is that our knighthood? Like where exactly do you, if you're a Christian man and you want to fight, and you really do have a warrior spirit and you have physical prowessness that you could contribute in a real worldly way, where do you go? Do you go fight for the military industrial complex? No, and that's one of the things that I hope that I'm able to help facilitate sometime this year is for Orthodox Christian men to learn tactical stuff, how to use tactical gear, different guns, handguns, rifles, shotguns, not for the purposes of offense, but for the purpose of competency, for the purposes of it. If something were to come, I always talk about, and also like jujitsu, martial arts, if you're not into guns, that's cool. You got to do something physical though. I don't believe you can be a man in the 21st century and not do something physical, because we don't do physical labor like we used to.
Right.
And we're not as strong. I mean, generally speaking, the average person as we used to. We know the testosterone levels are on a precipitous decline amongst all men in the West, significant since the 80s. So we're not as masculine. We don't have as much testosterone. We're not as strong as we used to be. Therefore, if you're a man, you got to do something physical. I don't care if it's working out. I'm into lifting weights. It could be martial arts. It could be tactical stuff. It could be hunting, whatever it is. You got to develop skills, physical skills, and then realize that those are in service of something larger than you. So the purpose for, if you were to go down the tactical route and learn all those skills, the purpose is not for you to be some Rambo. The purpose is that you have those skills and you can bring them to your local Christian community. And now you can educate all the other men. And now you have a group of men that are like-minded, that are skilled, and that if something were to happen, you have a community to lean on. And that's part of what's happening in the 21st century is, where's your community? You know, and I think that's doesn't matter the race or the religion. Like, where is your community in America in the 21st century? Most people really don't have a strong community. They have maybe their immediate family, and even then, obviously, we all know that there's tensions within families. But where's the community that you're willing to die for? And are they also willing to die for you?
Yeah.
And I think when men find that, it gives you a sense of peace, because that's what we all want.
Right.
We want something that we're willing to die for. And so for me, in the 21st century, I always say that's the Orthodox Church, because that gives me the permission to become the man that I want to be, that can serve my community and my parish in the correct way. And so
well
that's
said.
kind of
maybe the low testosterone levels are leading to the high divorce rates as well. I don't know.
Oh, I bet. I bet. Well, in ED, like one of my best friends is he's a naturopathic doctor, but he runs like a men's clinic for testosterone. And the horror stories that he's told me about young guys that are like 24 years old coming in, and they have the testosterone level of like a 70-year-old man, and they can't even get they can't even get hard. And this is from like overuse of sexualization of pornography, video games. They don't do anything physically active. I mean, that's never heard of in history. That 20-year-old men are having that much trouble with just natural functions of the male body. That's scary. And so we have women that are more masculine than they ever were, and we have men that are more feminine than they ever were. And so no wonder sexual relationships are absolutely screwed.
Yeah, man. What are some resources, maybe some books that people could go to? Let's say, I mean, we have people in the audience that are men, obviously women as well, that they want to learn more about what you're saying. What are some resources that they could go to? And also, what do you want to plug and promote as well? And where can people find you?
In regards to resources, our discussion today was a lot about like my perspective on biblical masculinity or Christian masculinity. So I guess I would refer back to the Bible. That's where I'm pulling a lot of my framework from. I don't know of an explicit book about masculinity per se. If you want to,
you might have to write one.
I've thought about it. Once I finish the dissertation, I do plan on doing something on Christian masculinity, and given something basically what we articulated today, but as an adjacent perspective to the red pill and the manosphere. Because if I concede much of their descriptive points, and then I provide a totally different set of prescriptions to resolve those, I don't see a whole lot that's out there right now doing something like that. But in regards to things like orthodoxy, if anybody's interested in anything that I talked about there's multiple books you can find on theology. There's a good one called The Byzantine Theology by Father John Meyendorff, which is about laying out, it's very straightforward about like what exactly the Orthodox Church is. In regards to like some of the transhumanist stuff, I would recommend reading the actual people that are promoting it, like Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. He's considered the prophet or the priest of the World Economic Forum. And he's explicit that he believes by 2045, there will not be a single fully biological human on the planet. Everybody will be augmented by then. And so that is coming from somebody who has some of the wealthiest backers on the planet behind him. So, I guess I'm kind of lost at words on which book particular, because I ramble a lot, as people know who probably just watched this. So I'm pulling from a lot of different places, and sometimes I'm not even sure where or what book I'm pulling from. But I would recommend, first and foremost, if anybody is appreciative of anything that I said, to reform your relationship with God, like prayer. If you're still skeptical about some of this stuff, that's cool. Like I'm talking as somebody who is a Bible believing, both, we can get into the Jungian, Petersonian, symbolic, archetypal framework of scripture, but also the literal. To me, it all comes together. So if that's not you yet, if you're like, man, I appreciate, I agree with a lot of you saying, but God became a man. I don't know about that. Okay, that's cool. Pray.
Yeah.
Just say a prayer. Just like reach out in an honest way. I'm talking about in the sincerity of your heart. If that's not where you're at yet, then you can't do it. But if you really want, like, get in a private place by yourself and have a private conversation with God. And I guarantee you, I've never talked with somebody who did that in full sincerity and then continued to do that over time, that God did not respond and show you that it is real. And that's where you can't give it to somebody. You can't give faith to somebody because it really is about this personal relationship with the transcendent.
Right.
And so if anybody wants to go on that path, I would recommend just pray. Just get on your knees at night and just give a sincere and have a conversation with the creator of the universe, however you understand it. Maybe you're not a Trinitarian yet. Maybe you believe in some abstract understanding of God. Okay. I mean, obviously I disagree, but if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. Like, pray and ask for truth and ask for insight on where to go next, what to do, what move to make. Like, hey, I'm struggling with this. I don't know what to do. And I guarantee you something will emerge. It could be through somebody in the next day, could be through other people. So the way God communicates to you is not you pray and there's a audible voice come from heaven that tells you and answers you immediately. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Pray, you have faith, and then you do the right things and see what happens. And people will enter your life. People will leave your life. Somebody will say something. A new friend will emerge. Providence will occur, or what secular people want to call synchronicity. It will happen.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it will happen, but it's based on the sincerity of your heart. So
yeah, absolutely.
If that's where you're at, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I listened to you in the past, and you were talking about relationships one time, and you said that you were talking about, if you're single, keep praying, and God will send the one for you. And I think, and you gave some testimony about that as well, and I appreciated that because I was definitely at a point struggling, and I just met someone not too long ago, and so I was thinking of what you said, and she's a beautiful woman, a woman of God. So I thought about that,
man. And that's a gift, right?
Yeah.
That's where, if I did write a book on masculinity, I was thinking about this, why all the red pill and the Manosphere guys would mock it, because the first point about finding your wife is that you can't find her. It has to be given to you. And so the point is to become the man that God wants you to be, so that you can be the man that woman needs. And that doesn't mean that our identity, somebody can misconstrue that as me saying that our identity is built on women. No, the point is that as a man and everything we articulated today, you got to get that stuff in line. And it's not saying that God won't give you, maybe somebody marries their high school sweetheart. God gave you the right woman from the get-go. The order in which these things occur is dependent on you and your circumstance. But for me, and I don't know I had to grow out of the phase I was in. I had to become much more responsible. I had to figure out what my purpose was. I had to build my business. I had to know what my values were and like where my life was going. Where is point B in my life? And so I don't think if you're a man and you can't say, not that we know the future, but if you can't say the direction, not even where you're going to be, but the direction of where you're going for the next 10 years, how can God give you a woman that's going to be there with you for the next 10 years? Because she has to follow you. And so, glory to God for you, man. I'm excited to hear that. And that's where it is providence. It's like, and for me, it was like, once I stopped looking and I gave up on this pursuit of finding her, they just emerge. And that's like that's like the faith in God. And then and if you're praying about it, it's like, and I assume that's why you were, because that's why you had the smile. Dude, it is like only you and God realize the providence of what just occurred. And you can't give that to somebody. You can tell them about it. You can try to explain it to them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's really cool about it. It was probably coincidence. Yeah. No, it's not coincidence, man. Yeah. It's not coincidence, because he answered everything that I was looking for. And it just took me to actually become the man that she was looking for. And because I'm the man that she's looking for, she's going to be willing to submit.
Yeah, definitely. What's the best site for people to go to find your videos?
So my YouTube channel is Church of the Eternal Logos. I also have another YouTube channel. It used to promote psychedelics. I've taken all those videos down. It's called David Patrick Harry on YouTube. And then I have a website, davidpatrickharry.com or churchoftheeternallogos.com. And I do one-on-one sessions. I have memberships with exclusive content behind a paywall, but I have tons of free content on the YouTube channel. And if you want to hear any more about some of the variety of topics, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different things that I try to dive into. But if that interests you in any way, I appreciate it. You can check me out at Church of the Eternal Logos, and you can always reach out to me at churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I had you on today is because when I look at the whole manosphere, there's a lot of bad voices, a lot of bad information out there, and I rarely see good Christian voices combating that information. So thanks for all your work, and hopefully people check out your work. Thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. God bless.
God bless.